Wow, look at
Wow.
that.
Isn't wonderful to be get together tonight. Awesome. So many wonderful territories. Thank you for entering into the chat. Although we're not in the same room tonight, we are all together on screen, relaxing in our homes, perhaps joining with a beverage, maybe a delicious snack, and ready for an evening with great conversation, warmth, and connection with one another. Tonight, we have men and women joining us from throughout the province, from the regions of the North Coast, the North, Central Interior, Okanagan, the Kootenays, Vancouver Island, Metro, Fraser Valley, and across Canada. And 8 LEAP educator friends are participating from Australia tonight, across that Pacific Ocean. So welcome to all. At this point, I'd like you to put your computer in gallery view, have your cameras on, audio off, and give a wave to one another as you scroll down the screen. Thank you, that was fabulous. Such energy and smiles on the screen. Wow, over 150 participants for this marvelous night of togetherness. Throughout the night, we'll be giving you the instructions verbally and on the chat on how to join the events. So let us get started first by making sure you are still in gallery view. This part is going to be new, so please pay close attention. Now turn your video off, and with your cursor, hover over the 3 dots in the top right-hand corner of your picture and hit hide non-video participants. So make sure you're still in gallery view. Now turn your video off, and with your cursor, hover over the 3 dots to the top right-hand corner of your picture and hit hide non-video participants. So welcome. Tonight, our moderator for the evening is Elizabeth Bell, Director of Professional Learning and Development from the BC Principals and Vice Principals Association. She will be speaking first with our special guest, Dr. Linda Kaser, and later with a panel of leaders for this conversation about women in educational leadership roles that will focus on influence, impact, challenges, and the quest for balance as women leaders. Following these conversations, you'll have the opportunity to respond to our guest comments and with each other, and finally, return to share comments and questions directly with all these amazing people who have joined us tonight. Please feel free to post questions in the chat option throughout the night as you listen to the fascinating dialogue. It gives me great pleasure. Our first guest tonight is Dr. Linda Kaser, a well-known provincial, national, and international educator and leader who has had tremendous impact of learning at all levels in the education system. Linda is a champion of innovation in public education and has created innovative learning environments in BC, Canada, and internationally. Linda has been a teacher, curriculum consultant, vice principal, director of instruction, professor at VIU, co-director of the Network of Performance-Based Schools and the Aboriginal Enhancement Schools Network. She is also the co-author of the books Leadership Mindsets, Innovation and Learning in the Transformation in Schools, Spirals of Inquiry, and the Spirals of Inquiry Playbook with Dr. Judy Halbert. Dr. Kaser received a Distinguished Leadership Service Award from the BC School Superintendents Association for her outstanding contributions in public education. Please welcome our speaker for tonight, Linda Kaser, and our moderator, Elizabeth Bell.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It is such a pleasure to be here this evening, and I will acknowledge that I am honored to be situated on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish people. I'd also like to acknowledge the National Day of Remembrance of Action on Violence Against Women that was yesterday, December the 6th. I remember well the immediate impact of the massacre at École Polytechnique in 1989, and I celebrate that we are gathered as a group of women and men tonight in conversation about women in leadership. And welcome again to my friend and colleague, Linda. Thanks so much for being here to play with these notions of influence, impact, challenges, and balance. We could probably talk about any one of these for days, but let's see if we could just scratch the surface of each one of them. Linda, you have had a long and illustrious career in education. As Jess said, from teacher, school and district, provincial leader, co-director of Knowing with Judy, international involvement with the OECD and several universities. In fact, I remember actually the first time meeting you was in the summer of 2005 when you had launched the inaugural session of the CSML program at UVic. And I knew then the impact that you were and would continue to have on new leaders. And yet, funnily, I remember most distinctly remembering you most as you ran towards the first tee box with only one sock on and your shoes in hand. Clearly, you had so much to do and so little time. But I also remember that we did laugh most of our way around that course. I know that you are a great influence on many, many educators, particularly women around the world. So I ask, you know, when you think back on the path that you have taken in your career in education, who are those who have influenced you as you began and as you grew in the many roles that you have had? Who stands out for you and why? Don't forget to unmute, Linda. There we go. There we
unmute go. And recognize the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam territories that we're so fortunate to live and work on. And thank you for the invitation. I think this idea of having a conversation is a great idea. You know, I'm a lifetime reader. I love to read. And so when I think about this question, the first thing that comes to my mind actually as somebody who has inspired me and influenced my thinking and still is influencing my thinking is Howard Gardner. You know, he wrote Multiple Intelligence. Then he wrote some work that isn't as well known. He wrote books and had a whole initiative around good work. And I think that's what tonight is about. It's about good work, where people who are feeling maybe a little lonely and maybe feeling a little blue about losing Christmas as they've known it, are getting a chance to be in community together and think about, you know, kind of the meaning of life and our wonderful profession of education. And right now he's writing a book about, it's called The Synthesizing Mind. And again, I think, you know, when I think of school leaders, and I'm sure that most people who are with us are formal school leaders, it's a job that requires synthesizing all the time. There's so much to it. It's so complex now, the work. That was before COVID, it was complex. Now it's got an additional layer of complexity. So I think it's fascinating to read about this world-class intellectual and very fine human being who is thinking about good work, who changed our view of intelligence so that it was a richer, more fulsome way, and is now thinking about his own mind and how he synthesizes and sort of telling a bit of a life story. So I recommend that book. But beyond that, I think particularly what came to my mind are these absolutely stunningly wonderful, and there's so many of them, but Indigenous women leaders that we have in our province. Lorna Williams is, you know, I met her when I was working at the ministry. I think I vaguely knew that she existed, but she's, you know, somebody's got to write 5 or 10 books about Lorna. She's just an amazing educator, and a lot of what we're doing now in BC education, in the curriculum, in the language work, in the cultural change is down to Lorna's work. Laura Tate's another one. You know, very proud now that she's an assistant superintendent in Nanaimo, and I met her when she was a graduate student. She gave me wonderful advice that I will pass on to all of you. She said, if you want to know anything about indigeneity, make an Indigenous friend. And I've taken that very seriously. So I have 6 new friends now that I consider lifetime friends. Trish Rossborough, who sadly passed away far too soon, was another director of instruction, Indigenous education. She was the first one who I ever heard said Aboriginal education is for everyone. And she invited us to start the Aboriginal Enhancement Schools Network. Just an absolute champion. And then Debbie Layton Stevens, who is Shimshan and lives in Vancouver and Prince Rupert. She taught all of us in the network, it's part of Shimshan belief structure, to walk slowly, walk beside me, and be the known face. And when you think about that as advice for leadership, don't be over me or behind me, be known to me, and pick a pace that we can both do, and let's stick together and get some goodness done. So all of these people have really inspired me, and I think we're so fortunate as British Columbians and Yukon Territory people and Canadians that we can draw on the best international thinking. But these 4 women and many others I could name are right up there in the pantheon of the all-time greats. They have the essence of learning in who they are, and they're wonderful teachers. So,
is there anybody that surprises you that they were an influence on you? Did anything jump out kind of at you, other than those women in particular, that you went, wow, yeah, that actually makes some sense to me. I need to pay some attention.
Yeah, well, I think the one that surprised me was perhaps, I met most of the people that I'm talking about in formal roles, not Howard Gardner specifically. I've never met him, but I feel like I know him. Was actually when I met Judy Halbert. I met her when I was working for the ministry the first time, and I was, wearing my ministry power suit and wandering through a Delta high school, and I saw this artifact on the wall about group counseling for grade 8 young people who had lost their family structure to divorce. It was in Tawasin. And I thought, group counseling? Like, I'd been a secondary English teacher. I'd never heard of group counseling back in the day. And I turned to this person in the hall and said, who thought this up? And she said, I did. So it was a surprising way to meet somebody who's definitely helped me with my leadership, and together we've been able to do a lot of good work, I think, that we wouldn't have been able to do if we'd operated separately. But
you most certainly have, and I suspect if I was to ask you where do we look for influences in our lives, you'd say just keep your eyes open and pay attention.
Totally.
That's what you did. I love that. Walk slowly and walk closely beside, and that in of itself guides and directs us as we go. Yeah. Let's shift a little bit then, because there are for sure influences on us, and we hope to be influences on others, really, if that's what we're doing as leaders. We hope to make impact. We want to have impact as a leader, and frankly, we do, whether we like it or not. Sometimes it's positive, and sometimes we miss legitimately, but it still has impact. And other times we fail to recognize the impact that we're actually having, partly because we might not get any direct feedback, whatever that is. You've had impact in so many ways. I know most of it positive. I'm sure there's been a few blips, but as you have grown with each stage of your own work, what have been your measures of your own impact? How did you know how you were doing and where to go to next?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think I'll answer the second part first. I am not a person who's ever known where I'm going next.
Okay, perfect.
And I highly recommend it, because in the third or fourth section of my career here, I've never really been bored. And I think I talk to people who say they can't wait to retire, or they can't wait to do this or that, and 10 more years until whatever. I've never felt that way. And I think it's because I've moved from very focused work to broad work, and then back to focused work to see if I can apply the broader work to a smaller setting.
Nice.
So, could never give anybody career advice because I don't actually really believe in that. I believe in just making sure that you keep learning, and then opportunities, I think, for that growth will come along. But I've forgotten the first part of the question. I got so interested.
The first part
in the
was
part.
how do you measure your own impact? Like
Yes,
how do you
measurement.
know?
Oh, that's a great question.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think I've always been interested in trying to help people be more curious. And certainly now that's how I would conceptualize it. Like, we know that the strongest systems around the world are those that cultivate the curiosity, the collective capacity of adults to think together on behalf of kids. And the kids who are going to be off are the ones who have their curiosity cultivated. And not many systems do that, but some do. Finland does. I think we're doing a pretty good job. Estonia is coming along. It's a really important part of operating in today's world. But when I was an elementary principal for the first time, I made a grid. We made it with the staff, and we've said, look, we can concentrate on a lot of things for young people, but what are the ones that matter to us the most? And we decided that, we wanted to raise kids who were thinkers, problem solvers. We wanted to raise kids who were really good at cooperative learning so that, they knew how to do teamwork. We wanted them to be highly responsible in that good, really looking out for other people way. I think it was pre-social responsibility, but that's what we wanted. And we also, because it was in a school community where the teachers were making a big effort and the parents were making a big effort getting their kids to sports, but the kids weren't making that much of an effort. And so we also had effort. And really, I think those four things. So anyway, we made this placement grid. That's how we had a way of assessing where kids were out on that continuum. We had our own learning progression for it. And really, I think that's what I've looked for in adults too. When I look at our current crop of grad students, I've just been reading their reflections. Are they thinking? Are they operating as a team in this kind of setting? Are they moving along that? Are they making an effort, or are they just, finessing the task? Those things, and I think I actually did my doctorate on that. That was a part of my doctoral work. Seeing that if you involve kids and parents together, could you move those dimensions? And we found that we could if we all worked on them together. So I think that's always stayed as part of what I'm looking for. And I'd curiosity more specifically now in that thinking category.
Yeah, my hunch in that is that how you measure your own impact are both the questions that are asked of you and that you ask yourself. That sense of curiosity is driven. It drives our impact, and good quality questions mean we're going somewhere. Yeah. Now I know from personal experience, and you probably understand this to a little bit, that the imposter syndrome can be real, and that those feelings of inadequacy that persist despite evidence of great success. I think women often fall into this thinking a little bit. And I wonder what advice you would share with some of the women leaders who might identify a little bit with that imposter syndrome so that they too are able to acknowledge the kind of impact they're having.
Yeah, well, I think I'd frame that. I mean, it's a great question. And maybe partly we have imposter syndrome because somebody gave it a really good name.
It is a great name, yeah.
So the doubts that we have as sort of self-reflective human beings, it has a syndrome. But because I'm sure that, there are intelligent fellows who sometimes feel that they're in over their heads.
Oh, I'm sure.
And it might be partially, when people take on responsibilities or new responsibilities that are bigger than they can take on, it's probably very connected to growth mindset. And I'm not sure that really is gender. I think it's the kind of family raising that you've had. But let's just say that you've got that. Something happened to us. Judy and I are working with a group of not-for-profit organizations, form sort of a federation. We're the only network, but everybody else has got a social purpose, and they're a wonderful group of people. And we had some leadership, so we do some development together, usually about a week a year, which is more fun. One of my advice to new formal leaders is get yourself involved with a not-for-profit. It doesn't have to be a huge time commitment, but these are fantastic people and it's just so satisfying. Anyway, we did a leadership activity, and this is something that we could do. As a matter of fact, we could do it through the professional learning branch. We were asked to ask 30 people. I think I asked 10 people, but just say, you know me, we've worked together. Can you think of a time, a situation, what I did and the impact it had and why you think that's a leadership quality that I have? Now, that's a very simple thing to do. It was hard.
Hard work, yeah.
It was hard to, I felt self-conscious sending these things out. But honestly, it was just absolutely fantastic feedback. And when I think about how much feedback I've had, where it's helpful in sort of knowing your strengths, I think many very fine educators, formal leaders, especially in this province, actually don't know all of the qualities that they're bringing.
Yeah, totally
and having
agree.
people who I respected, they're not in a line authority, they're not underlings, they're people I respect. Right. I was reading them, an hour ago, and it's just, it was absolutely fascinating. And people said different things, but just to get that feedback and know that those are strengths that I have, because as I read the incidents, because they were real incidents, I thought, yes, I did do that. And I could see if I was an observer in my own career that I would think that was leadership. So I think that's an activity that we should do every 3 or 4 years. We should just, send something out to 10 people we really respect and say, I'm thinking about my leadership and I really appreciate it. And I think people enjoyed on the whole, the opportunity to write something.
I think that's a wonderful activity, and it's something we don't, you're right, do very well. And giving feedback is one thing, receiving feedback is another, and yet another is actually asking for it and being prepared to hear what you hear. But more often than not, and we know this with students, when we ask them to do self-evaluation, they're harder on themselves than they maybe need to be. And so to make sure that we're open with that and hear it and share that. It takes a certain strength and a certain vulnerability to do it, but thank you for that. Yeah. I think that's important if we think of impact that we're having. If we shift a little bit now, because we know in our advanced years, Linda, that
speak for yourself.
Yeah, okay.
Junior.
That it's challenges that actually make us grow. That without them we don't find new ways of thinking or of being, and that while they may feel daunting at times, we know for one we can count on them, but that without them, leadership isn't even naturally as fulfilling. But like everything, changes or challenges often have a trend. And they shift with the times. As we overcome one, another pops up, and certainly this year would be an indication of that. Can you talk about some of the trending challenges that you've experienced as a leader over the years? Have they changed? Are they evolving? Are they the same as they once were? Are there trends in these challenges you've seen?
You know what? That's a fascinating question, because it's almost like the history question, isn't it? I mean, there was a time, there was a time when I was a secondary woman principal. There weren't that many of us.
Right.
And
yeah, me too.
So, that was a challenge. And if there's time later on, I'll tell you how we overcame that challenge, because it's slightly vulgar, but was really fun.
Yeah, I bet.
Well, I'll just say quickly now, we 6 of us formed a dinner group. And again, this is advice to people starting out. Find 5 people who are really good at what you're struggling to do, because I had never been a secondary vice principal. I'd been a very successful elementary principal. And the slightly vulgar part was, I think we'd had a glass or 2 of wine, and we decided we were going to call ourselves the Boobs. And I think it was something like, brilliant, organized, older, bosses.
Yeah, I don't think so, but okay.
Something like that. And then we wrote in our time text that we had a Bob meeting, a meeting with Bob. So the one went the other. And we thought this was extremely funny. But the dinner meetings were just fantastic. And we ended up using each other's speeches. Like, it made our life so much easier. And just, again, about feedback, having a group that you could problem solve. Those dinners were magic, and we did it over a period of time. And when I look back, I think I've always, whatever the challenge was, the trends part, I worked for the ministry for a couple of years in field services. I had a wonderful job. I had money that I could give out for sort of school improvement, which was a dream job. And there were very few women in government at that time. And so at the end of my secondment, I was asked to stay on as a manager. So I went into the deputy of the day and I said, you know, what actually, if I stayed, you know, kind of, what do you do here, sort of question. And he leaned back in his chair. Yeah, it's quite a good sized man. And he leaned back in his chair and he said, well, Linda, he said, when the right wing is in, technology, computers, and excellence is in. And he said, when the left wing is in, he didn't say indigenous, he actually said the pre-word before Aboriginal, but let's say indigenous people and women are in. And he said, in between these swings in the ministry, we've tried to make small gains for students in school. And I thought, oh, wow. And ran from the room and ran from the building and took a vice principal's job in my previous school district, because I thought he was so honest. And I think, Liz, I don't really think that's changed. Like, sometimes people, you just hear everybody say, you know, they're data obsessed. What are the numbers? What are the analytics? What are the, you know, whatevers? And it doesn't always go with a political party, which is what makes BC fun. And then sometimes it's all about the story and the humanity and, you know, equity and helping the underdog. So
so at the end of the day, the trend really is to keep students first.
Absolutely.
The challenge is to keep students first for whatever is the political will at the time.
That's right. And know who you are and form your, don't make it just a technology-based network. I mean, absolutely use the social media tools, but meet for dinner once a month and thrash out the things that need to be thrashed out so that you can, you know, lead properly in your school, because you need a place to figure things out that has some confidentiality.
Absolutely. Well, as in much of life, we need to sustain a model of survival somehow, and we are on this quest for balance more than it seems. I don't know. I mean, 2020 has been a hell of a year, particularly since March with the pandemic, and it certainly has impacted people in so many tragic and challenging ways. You know, we can't thank enough the frontline and essential workers for keeping us going. And certainly, I know all of us at the BCPVPA, and I know you would recognize teachers and school leaders, all educators, as part of that essential workers on the front line right now. And we may not have pots banging at 7 o'clock for the educators, but we certainly could have. But from the experience, we both know that the pressure on educational leaders is and always has been really intense. Some of it driven by our own need to serve, to be sure, and some of it driven by the increasing complexities just of the landscape generally. And on top of that, then we throw in a global crisis, and we have our own realities in personal and family life. Some of it, we put it all together, it can spell burnout for sure in school leaders. And as we know, we should take care of ourselves in order to take care of others. We know we often get that turned around backwards, and we take care of others before of ourselves. We have a lot of emphasis these days on physical and mental well-being. And I know I've heard you say you work hard and you play hard. But can you talk a little bit about, the networking is super important, but what are some of your take on how we have a balance, how we have that quest for balance, and how we find a way to be able to sustain all the energy it takes to be the leaders we need to be for those students we focus on?
Yeah, no, again, that's a really great question. You know, when you think about the word balance, like I sometimes find myself almost having a mental block about it when people talk about balance. Because I mean, if you're going to take a leadership position, what you do, what we do in those roles may look unbalanced to other people, but a lot of it is deeply satisfying. Those years that I was a secondary principal, I went to everything in the evenings, but I loved it. I loved the drama, I loved the music, I loved the sports. I turned up, guys were coaching volleyball. If I could get there, I got there. I didn't, necessarily stay for the whole tournament, but I was there and I loved it. So I think you have to, I think that's where I said work hard, play hard. I think the hardest thing for those of us who have a fair amount of drive, which you need for leadership, is it's like being a runner. You're supposed to take a day off a week.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's the part that's hard. So, but I think we have to get, you have to get better at that. And now with technology, you really have to get better at it. You have to figure out how to take a day off a week. We live in a profession where you can go on great holidays. And I just don't understand why, especially women, and that's got to do with MS. We're in a northern country. You've got to get sun the winter holiday.
Yes, you do.
March. Don't save your money for retirement or your pension, because it might end up being a pandemic where you can't travel for 2 years. Right. Like you have to say, I'm in this, that's right, I'm in this high demand. And I think the other thing is, I would say just in the short run, I've been using that app called Calm, and it takes 10 minutes at the beginning of the day. And it is just, the best thing. So if there are people who are listening who haven't tried that yet, I definitely recommend it, because I've done yoga. So if balance is like doing the tree in yoga, then it's a good thing. But if it's just another way of feeling guilty because you've taken on a job that has quite a lot of demands in it, then it's not really going to help you. Then it's like being on a teeter-totter and you're constantly balancing, and you're not enjoying the joy that working hard and getting somewhere can give you. Or you're on a high wire rope, which is the dream I had after the ministry guy talked to me.
Exactly.
I don't want to be on a high wire with people pulling on those ropes.
If you're not passionate about what you're doing, if you can't find the joy in what you're doing, you probably need to rethink why you're doing it. And certainly leadership provides so much joy, if not challenge. But there is joy in what we do, and that's what your life has been, and that's the beacon that you are for so many. And I want to thank you so much for the opportunity just to have this conversation that has allowed us just a snippet of your thinking in there. I suspect there will be folks who want to throw things into the chat and to comment on it and build on what you have. But for now, I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica, and I think she's going to go introduce a panel now as we move forward. Thanks for the conversation, Linda.
Not at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda and Liz, for that engaging and reflective conversation around your journey in leadership, Linda, in education. Fascinating. At this point, we now invite our panel of educators who will engage in an informal conversation with one another around the leadership thoughts that they've just been shared by Linda. Before I introduce the panel, though, I'd like to remind you to still have your computer in gallery view, have your video off, and if necessary, hover over those 3 dots over your picture and hit hide video non-participants. The information will also be in the chat. Later, you'll turn on your video to return for breakout sessions, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce the panel. Joining us tonight is Tara Zielinski, who is presently an elementary principal in West Vancouver School District. She has taught in both the private and public sector schools in Thailand, Europe, and North America. When she's not leading and learning, she can be found running, hiking, skiing, and traveling. Welcome, Tara. Also joining us on the panel tonight is Kathy Pantaleo, who is an elementary principal in the Richmond School District. She's been a classroom teacher, literacy consultant, and vice principal. Her passion is centered around creating equitable learning environments in schools where learners are at the center of all decisions. Kathy loves taking long walks with her family and dog. Our third panel member tonight is Ranjit Bains, a secondary principal in the Vancouver School District. She has been a vice principal, a teacher who has taught a variety of subjects, including biology, science, math, and many others. Ranjit is passionate about supporting student success, both social, emotionally, and academic success. She cares about her students, her school community, and believes strongly in servant leadership. Ranjit loves reading, exercising, and fun times with her family and friends. Our final panel member is Lynn Tomlinson, presently Assistant Dean of Professional Development and Community Engagement in the Faculty of Education at UBC. Lynn has taught Aboriginal education in Canada as part of the Teacher Education program, as well as other courses. Lynn has been a teacher, vice principal, director of instruction in the West Van School District, as well as being a regional leader for the Network of Inquiry and Innovation. She is passionate about improving the life chances of all students. Lynn also enjoys sports and spending lots of time with her family. Thank you for joining us tonight. We look forward to the fishbowl.
Now it's that awkward silence before we start.
I loved Linda's comment about the good work for thinking about influencers. That for me was just such a great way to start my thinking about who has influenced me and you know, what's been important. And Linda's so well read and so scholarly that she can, you know, grab a quote at any time. But I think our conversation the other night with the four of us, when we talked about who's influenced us, we did really want to think that it wasn't just women, but also men who have really influenced us in our lives and as leaders. So I'm just starting the conversation.
Absolutely. I think another thing that we discussed the other night that everybody here probably would agree is that a lot of our influences have come definitely from our path in education as young educators, as young women in education, and those influences that helped us get to where we are, whatever everybody's role is in leadership. But a lot of people that also influenced us were those that aren't educators. And you know, I think about my neighbor who is the CEO and CFO for Guinness and Labatt for years, and she was the first woman ever in the beer industry, and she's famous. And she, you know, I'll go to her for a lot of different things because she led in a huge company that was all men, and she was the only woman. And so, you know, I don't go to her for those kinds of questions, but I go to her for a lot of bigger questions around you know, other industries that really do influence. And sometimes we get so stuck in education that going externally is something that can be effective.
One of the other things we talked about, I think, that still sticks out for me along my journey is sometimes you learn what you don't want to do as a leader. And whether you learn that from a male, female, you know, whoever, sometimes it's about grabbing those pieces that you're thinking, ooh, that doesn't seem like that would be part of, you know, who I would want to be as a leader or part of my voice as a leader. And that always sticks out for me when I find myself in a challenging situation and thinking about what to do. Sometimes I think first about what I wouldn't do based on some of those influences from the past.
Well, it's interesting also, Linda, when she was talking just now, talked about in her past how she wore that power suit. And I know that when I was thinking about being an administrator, I thought, well, what does that mean for me? What does that look like? Does it mean that I have to go out and buy a power suit? And, you know, and Lynn, you also talked about how there were male leaders, female leaders. We all had mentors as educators and teachers. And I'm lucky in the Richmond School District that I've come across a lot. And a vice principal, he just taught me to be myself. And maybe that doesn't mean wearing the power suit, but it means about being yourself and having that, you know, where you care for people and you're just coming with the best intentions. And I think that when we're able to figure out what that looks like and sounds like, and when you're sitting in your office and you're thinking, how did I get here? Then you have that confidence to know that you're there for a reason.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think we've all also, as leaders with our staff and also when we're working with parents, you know, we sort of discussed how important it is to be able to know who you are and what you believe in, and always have kids' needs first. And we, you know, we thought about when we were starting out in our leadership roles, sometimes feeling really quite vulnerable in that role. But if you know you're just, you know, staying true to who you are and staying the course, then it'll work out. And I think that was sort of an important commonality we all thought about when we were starting out and when being influenced by others.
I think, you know, the story that I always recall and I tell is, and I shared with these ladies earlier, was just around the fact that when I got my first principalship, I didn't have a vice principal, and it was my very first principalship in West Vancouver. And I was there in the summer, and I thought, you know, I'm sitting in my office and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like what, they made a terrible mistake here. I don't think I can do this. And yet the window was open, and, you know, the field was there, and the playground was there, and I could hear the children's laughter just coming in through that window, and it brought tears to my eyes. And I thought, no, you know what? I can do this because I'm doing it for them. And I think when we move on to that idea of impact, and I loved, you know, what Linda mentioned there, and Liz, I think actually you mentioned it. What is asked of us, and what do we ask of others? And I thought in that moment, you know, I have been tasked with an enormous job here, and again, going back to being myself, that the only way to get through this is, number one, to be myself and to be my authentic self, to admit when I don't know what I'm doing, but also to lean on others. And you know, we can't completely know our impact until we've listened and we've sat down at the table with others to sort of say, you know, who did have impact before I got here? What is the history of this building and of this staff? And you know, where do I want it to go? What do I want to be left behind when I do leave? Because we are all replaceable. But what is that piece that I want left?
When we were talking about that impact, we also talked about how change can be so slow as well. And sometimes you don't know your own impact in a school community until after you've left. And also knowing that, you know, some initiative or project or, you know, movement that you were part of while you were in your school community, that it sustains itself even after you're gone. And that's a measure of that impact, and hopefully a measure of your own success as well. But I think sometimes when you're in it and so close to it, you can't see it. And, you know, I know I've been in this situation multiple times where you're just like, I think I did everything wrong. I don't know what I was doing. And I thought I was being true to myself and making the decisions. But, you know, when we have those moments where it feels like what you did made nobody happy, and then it's something that you see again over time. And when you look back on it and whether it sustains and that measure of impact after you've left.
Well, we're all being watched, right? By not just by our staff and our students and our parent community, especially now when everything is just so uncertain and there's a high level of stress among everybody. You know, they want somebody who's able to stay calm, but also someone who's real, you know, to say, yeah, I'm struggling too. These are things that I'm doing to help myself. And I've been finding that when I'm naming that to people and not pretending that I'm immune to all these things, I'm also having now people or staff in particular coming to me saying, you know, when you said that, I'm trying that as well. And so that tells me that, yeah, I am making a difference. And I know recently I was kind of fortunate where I came back to a school that I was vice principal at. I don't know, I was telling you that the other day. And it was interesting to come back 5 years later. And even though it was my first year as a vice principal, and I think I was doing a terrible job, I came back and people were happy that I had come back. And not only that, but they were also telling me about the things that were sustained of what I had started there. So yeah, Ranjit, it goes back to what you were saying. Sometimes you go and you have no idea if you made a difference or not, you know, because we're not the kind of people to go say, hey, can you tell me if I made a difference or I had an impact? It's nice, you know, to be able to know afterwards, or even in my situation in the moment now, that we are able to help others.
I think we also talked a little bit about what we're passionate about, and that passion will breed impact. And you know, we do, I think, Ranjit, you were saying earlier, you don't even realize how you're having an impact sometimes. And Linda's idea that maybe get some feedback from others and find out, you know, what it is that you have done well or might need to work on. You discover these amazing things sometimes that you had no idea that you were able to bring to your staff. So yeah.
I think too, one thing that, sorry, Angie.
I was just going to say, now we're cutting each other off. Here we go. I was going to say that something Liz said too, that if you're going to ask for that feedback, then be prepared for, you know, those pieces that you weren't quite aware of. Because, you know, sometimes we get that feedback whether we ask for it or not. And so you do have to be quite strong in kind of going, okay, you know, what's the context for this individual? Because, you know, when somebody almost lashes out, right? And I had a situation like that recently, and I thought, oh, wow, I really was not expecting that. And it was a situation where I had to kind of step back and realize that it wasn't only about me and decisions that I was making, but there was context for this individual where, you know, perhaps they saw the situation differently than I had. But it was good feedback, right? It was good for me to think about it and reflect on it, that if somebody in my school community is feeling this way, and maybe more people are feeling the same way, and that's something I might need to tune into and get more feedback on. Sorry, Tara, I think I cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh, you read my mind. And I was going to mention the exact same thing, that some of the feedback I've gotten along the way has been, and we all have very different leadership styles. I tend to put a hustle in my boogie and my heels, and off I go, and I want to get things done. And I had an AA one time that one of my first AAs, and she always called my leadership style, I can't believe I'm admitting this to everybody, but it was the woo and slap that I would brought everybody in, and then I was like, okay, now let's get her done, you know, and bring everybody in gently, and then let's get it done. And so I sometimes have to really step back from that and look at that bigger picture. And that's something that's taken me a number of years to learn. And I think what we talked about again the other evening, us ladies, is just that essential component in all of this, that's that trust, you know, and our impact that we have is so different when trust is a foundation to our leadership and our capacity in our buildings and in our communities and doing our job. It doesn't make it easier necessarily, but it does shift a little bit how we do business when our team, you know, when the components of our team understand us, they get our style, and that when that trust is there, then it's sort of, you know, paving the path during really difficult times, like when there's been a strike in public schools, like when there's been this pandemic. It does sort of help to float the boat a little bit more most of the times. But I also find that when I have that level of trust, and then I do have someone come in to my office, Ranjit, or say something, or, you know, go to our rep or something, and I sort of almost feel like I'm slapped harder because I do have that trust. So it's, you know, sometimes it can be a double-edged sword too. You kind of think, like, just come to me, like, I thought we had this, you know, but that maybe that's not their perspective, even though it was mine. So that can be difficult too.
Should we move on to challenges?
Lynn, do you want to share something?
I just remember we talked, you know, because we're focusing on women in leadership. We talked about not being taken seriously always, you know, when we started out, and maybe, you know, I won't lead, that was sort of the general theme of what we all got to, but for women in leadership, perhaps that's something that we start out a little bit behind with, and we all had that same story.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting how sometimes even in my role right now, I have a vice principal who's a male, and often when we're going together and we meet someone new coming to the school, then they'll assume he's the principal. And so we have like this code that we've worked out together where he'll instantly introduce himself as the vice principal, because it's happened noticeable number of times. So there are these things that we just work on having that thick skin about. But it is interesting how, you know, those assumptions do exist, for sure.
I would agree. I think too, the other thing that we sort of mentioned, and this is a reality, I think, for all of us in our province, is that the shifting demographic and the shifting landscape of our clientele, really, of our community and all of our stakeholders, has really changed significantly, and not just in the Lower Mainland, but all over our province, all over our country for sure. And you know, the cultural beliefs and the perception sometimes of women in a leadership role or in a position of quote unquote perceived power, even though we don't perceive ourselves that way, that can sometimes be difficult too. And so really having to shift our mindset and the way that we perceive ourselves as leaders, the way that we look at sort of a North American view on leadership and on expectation, having to, you know, for me at least, having to really give that some second thought when I'm working with families that have never had that experience before, and they're in a position where they just don't understand that as a reality. And that I've noticed that significantly over the last, I'd say 5 to 6 years. It's really been a big shift for me.
I'd say one thing though, with being a part of leading a culture of learning level 1 and 2 has really helped me learn how to engage in those difficult conversations. So I'm not shy about that, you know, and I think that's where, you know, you learn to have that courage and, you know, I don't know. I don't remember where I heard this. I think honestly, I was listening to a podcast by Brene Brown, and she was talking about having a strong back, but a soft heart. And that really resonated with me because I think that that's a lot of what we do as women leaders is we have like that caring, nurturing side to us, but we also really need to have that really strong back and not be afraid to engage in those hard conversations or say those difficult things as well.
And you know, I'll be honest that I think I got better with more experience with those difficult conversations. And Tara, you were talking about wanting, you know, building trust and the relationships being so important. And, you know, I'm now, you know, in a different kind of a context, and it's all adult learners and very different, but the relationships are just so important. And I think my having the experience of having to engage in those difficult conversations, even if it's someone that's a friend on staff, you know, or a parent that you've, you know, known for a long time, or, you know, all kinds of connections you may have. I do think having done it several times and seeing what it feels like does make a difference. The first time is super hard. There's a new vice principal out there, a new principal. It's really hard having those difficult conversations, and you go home and you cry. You know, there's lots of going home and crying, and that's okay, but it is hard.
I'm gonna cut in here for just a minute and just say what an incredible conversation that you're all having, and I hear words like vulnerability and trust and authenticity and strong backs and warm hearts, and I know that each of you well enough to know that you are the epitome of all of that. I know that there's always the struggle with balance, and we're even balancing that kind of time tonight is there's so many things that we juggle in the air. But I just I want to say thank you so much at this point for sharing your experiences and your insights in such a candid way. There's no doubt that a certain vulnerability was necessary for this conversation, and I thank you very much for agreeing to and for prepping and participating. I have to say that when Jessica and I send emails of invitation to these four, we received an affirmative response in record email time. Often you wait days to get something back. It was a matter of moments from all of these folks. We had a feeling that you'd be able to share so much, and you have done that. So I want to say thank you so much to each of you for having done that. We want to give the rest of the almost 200 people are here tonight the opportunity to talk with one another. And this would be for an opportunity for you in smaller groups to respond to the comments made by Linda, the stories and the comments made by our panel, and a chance for you to share your own experience of any one or all of the components of influence or impact, challenge, or balance. So I'm going to ask Anne-Marie, who's lurking in the background ever thus for us, to put you into random groups of 6 people. And once you accept the invitation to the room, wait till you do, we'd invite you to turn your camera on and your audio and go to a gallery view so that you can see all 6 of the folks in your group. We certainly want to leave the space for those of you who wish not to join a room or would prefer to leave the video off. It's totally up to you. We acknowledge that you may desire to speak with people you know, and we encourage you to do that, but at another time. Tonight, we hope that you will enjoy meeting people in this random space, but do so at your own comfort level. We will ask the groups to self-regulate your conversation, to group regulate. So be sure to introduce yourselves, ensure that all voices are shared and that you monitor the time. We have about 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll send out a 2-minute warning just to bring you back from the breakout room. So we'll say 15 minutes for you to have time in there. And if there are any questions, pop them into the chat for us as you go. And with that, if you have it, then I'm going to ask Anne-Marie to do your thing, and we'll send you into breakouts, and then we're going to bring you back after so that you'll have an opportunity to speak more directly with Linda and the panel. So enjoy your conversations. Once again, thank you to our panel, to Linda. We'll catch you in about 15, 20 minutes, and we'll have more interaction with everybody else. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy your breakouts. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome all back. For all that you were able, I do hope that your conversation was great. I know it probably could have gone on a whole lot longer, but I hope that you did enjoy the time together that we had. As you re-enter the main room, I invite you to move perhaps to the speaker view. And just make sure your audio's turned off, but you're just fine to leave your camera on as long as we hold the line here with all this audio. It also makes it a little bit easier when we have people talking, because at this time for the next couple of minutes, we would love to hear from you. We'd love to open the floor to all 120 some of you, and perhaps you'd like to share a comment that struck you from your breakout room, or perhaps a direct question that you might have to Linda or any of the panels. Perhaps you'd like to share your own story of influence, impact, challenge, or balance, or anything else that's here on your mind. So please don't be shy, and you could either pop things into the chat. You could go to in the participants way down at the bottom of your screen there. If you open that panel, there's a raise your hand button on the bottom of that panel as you open it. And if you did that, if you've got to have a comment, then we'll watch that and invite you in. Or if you choose and you just want to unmute and you've got something to say, please, in a quiet moment, please do that. We hope that some of you will be comfortable. And we encourage this conversation for all of us together. So if you'd like to say something out here, please, this is your opportunity to talk with everyone. I see chats coming up. Thank you to everyone for such inspirational women. Nice. 10-year-old daughter listened for a bit and we're fascinated by the strong women. That is such a neat thing to hear, Kelly. Thank you for that. It's good to have that being focused out there. Highlighting a focus on courage versus challenged. Yes, that was such a great comment. That comment, it was good to hear. Anybody got a comment or a question you'd like to pose to Linda? She's with us. We don't often get her, and we would love if somebody would like to have a direct conversation with her for just a moment.
Hi, Liz. Debbie here. I'll talk to Linda.
Hi, Debbie. Good to see you. Happy to have you talk to Linda. Linda, I'm going to get you to hit your, your audio and videos there. Debbie, what have you got?
That Linda and Judy were such a huge influencer, and me as a learning to become a leader, I was fortunate to do the program at UVic with them, both of them for 2 years. And yeah, the leader I have become, and oh, sorry, there's my cat.
Oh, there's that cat.
you know, all come back. I hear their words, relationships, and the one thing I still do that I remember doing at UVic when we were there in the summer times was the walk and talks around the campus, walk and talks. And I'll do that with some of my students that, you know, sitting in my office, or that is just not a good place. So I'm like, let's go for a walk. Sometimes we go around the block and I'm like, yes, I'm going for a walk, and I'm talking, and we, you know, make a connection. And I still use that 15 years later now. Has it been that long? Maybe, I don't know, that long. But and also this time of year, 10 years ago, when I barely knew Judy and Linda too, I was dealing with cancer with my son, and they so graciously opened their house for our family to stay while we were in Vancouver between places. Wow. And I hardly knew them. And so they're just wonderful people. Thank you, Linda. And Judy, if you're listening too.
She's listening. Thanks, Debbie. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about grad students. You know, you were a wonderful human being right from the beginning. So we felt like we knew you really well. And that business about walking, you know, with kids, but also with, you know, staff go through really hard times, just taking them for one walk around the building. And I also think, you know, I've had parents come in really steamed and accusing the teacher of racism or whatever. And I find sitting in my office just doesn't get anywhere. I say, let's grab a cup of coffee and walk around the school, you know, twice. And usually by the time you've gone it 3 times, at least you had a walk. And
you get to walk in too.
You usually have a relationship that's different. So we do way too much of our work sitting down. So
Linda, I've got a question for you, Linda. I want to pop in, and this is from Chaz. How do we dismantle the hierarchy in leadership? Okay, and how do we blow up patriarchy? I mean, let's get down to this. That a girl, Chaz.
I knew I had an affinity with Chaz when I saw her at the back of a network room and said, who are you? And she said she likes to sort of lurk. Well, I think 2 things, 2 quick pieces of advice. One, we have to stop talking about administrators. Only in BC do you hear this word. It was brought to us by a very harsh politician, Van der Zalm. There should be a huge fine. It should be at least $100 US if you ever use it in your writing or your speaking. Sandra has changed, you know, the magazine from adminfo to something very better, but there should just be a fine, because administrator, it sounds like somebody who pushes paper for a living. That's not what any of you are doing. That's not what we're talking about tonight. So get rid of the language. And then I think you get rid of patriarchy by forming those circles of women and good men, whoever you like to go out for dinner with, and talking, like I've always thought that the center of the school system was a circle, and the circle is, you know, me as a teacher and my kids and the families, and everybody else is a support to that circle. So the network is flat, and if we just think that way and act that way, it starts to become that way. Like we are now known internationally as the most networked provincial jurisdiction in the world, and that's because we work in a networked way. And you know, it doesn't mean that it ends overnight, but I think as we get rid of patriarchy, as women own their own power, and I see way more of that now than I did in decades past, and that's a good thing. And wonderful men, like we work at UBC now, you know, Dean Bly Frank is a man. He's a fantastic human being and a superb leader. So allies, connecting, and it's just a matter of time, I think, until we take over. And I'm a big fan of Stacey Abrams in the States and Georgia. I'm wishing her luck. And I'm going to buy and read her romance novels that she wrote, because I feel I can make a contribution as a Canadian to her financial success. But I've also bought her book about leadership, which is sort of leadership from the outside. I think doing just what Chaz does, which is forming alliances with people outside of schools as well as inside. Eventually, the network takes over.
Thanks for that, Linda, and that powerful concept of circle, which we find certainly in the Indigenous principles, and there's a reason for that. You don't find a lot of, well, you find different hierarchies in every organization, and there's a necessity of some organization, but to have that flat sense of circle that allows us all to lead and all to learn really makes a difference as to where we're going. So
and there's one little nuance there, Liz, that you made me think about, and that as a principal in Mission School District, which was a very tough place to work for a bunch of reasons I won't go into, the one place where you got respect as a principal was when you went to meet with the Stolo, because they saw you as a chief, chief of your building. And there's something very delightful about that when you work in an environment where there's, not automatic respect for your role. So right. there's some honoring of people who do the hard work of leading in that tradition as well.
Yes, and I would agree that at times it feels like the leadership is sometimes the missing cog in the conversation about education. Lots of conversation about teaching, lots of conversation about trustees, and lots of conversation about the ministry. But sometimes we miss that ever important piece of the flat wheel of the leadership in school buildings. And I think we need to make sure that it's there. And I think women bring that out even more because of the perspective and the way in which we can do that. And good men. And there are many, many of my influencers were good men.
Yeah, I just want to go back to how we talk about each other. Like, it doesn't take that long to say formal leader or principal and vice principal. Like, let's use that language. But in the independent sector, it's often headmaster or headmistress. But a guy in the independent sector told me that if it's a co-ed school, they call them head mattresses, which I thought was very funny. I wasn't expecting that sense of humor. So, but you know what? Like the executive head, this is language that inspires respect. Administrator, you think of some poor old drone buried under paper or under a large computer. It just brings the wrong vision. And I believe, by the way, that the principals and vice principals in BC are the best in the English-speaking world because we've had the toughest circumstances. And so we've had to learn to be cooperative and exert influence through persuasion and cooperation. And that's made us way stronger leaders. And now that we have Indigenous ways of learning as well, that's also deepened our work now that we have so many more Indigenous colleagues who can help show us how societies get along over time. So we should feel very proud to be formal leaders in the BC system, which is now regarded as one of the finest in the world for very good reasons.
Thank you, Linda. And albeit I know there may be more comments and questions, I'm aware that it is pushing 8:30, and I think that close that you've just offered us is a brilliant one to end on. Jessica, I think I am going to turn it back over to you to close us out for the evening.
Thank you, Liz. It's been a magical night, and we just want to thank Linda, you, Liz, the panel, Tara, Lynn, Ranjit, Kathy, and all the participants for your ideas, your time, your presence, your dialogue, and coming together as a community of learners tonight and making the night special by sharing your stories of leadership and the joy of leading. It's marvelous here in BC to be together tonight. And to all of you, I invite the conversation maybe to continue with maybe a Zoom call to somebody you've met tonight or a friend following this time together, or another time. The stories tell us all about our past and our future. Two things before we go. On behalf of all of us at the BCPVA, we'd like to thank you. Have a marvelous holiday season. I also like to thank the BCPVA staff who continually support the PLD programs that we offer, particularly Anne-Marie Kruger and Sandra McMurray behind the scenes. Thank you so much for your work. And just before we go tonight, make sure your camera's on, and let's do one more final wave. We wish you all the best for a festive holiday season and have a marvelous time. So good night. Thank you again. And we hope to see you soon in the new year.